Okay, so when I send out, good morning or good evening, by the way, when I send out your links today, what you're going to notice is that I've spent most of this morning adding the book of Leviticus to your unlisted YouTube list. So I'm going to keep working on that, but by the time you receive the links to today's class, that's what the change that you'll notice as you go down to the YouTube listings is that it will also have the entire book of Leviticus from this year that you can access on YouTube. There's some of the later ones that I've uploaded, they're not completely finished yet. They have to convert them to SD or something. But by the time you receive the newsletter, the email with the links, hopefully they'll all be available. If they're not, just hang in there. They should be shortly. It takes some little time to process. So I've taken your suggestions on how to list them so that it's easy to find either by the order, like the number of the Torah portion, the name of the Torah portion, the year of the Torah portion, the crazy title of the Torah portion, and part 1 and part 2. So if you need more than that, I probably can't help you because it was crazy how many places I had to dig around to get the proper descriptions to go with the correct file and so forth, and to get it named properly. And so if I've made a mistake, it's entirely possible that I've uploaded something as something else or put the wrong number on it or something. If you notice a mistake on that, please feel free to bring that to my attention, because it's real easy to go back in and edit titles and descriptions and those sorts of things. But where I was basically uploading on top of uploading on top of uploading, it's entirely possible I lost my place and put something in the wrong spot. So you know to check my numbers, right? That's just a given. All right. Let's get into the Torah portion because we've got lots to cover. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And our title is going to be Spy Novel, because novel also means something new, a transition. It might be similar, just like they call it the novel coronavirus. It doesn't mean that coronaviruses are new. They've been around for ages. This is a new one, a new presentation of an old thing. And that's the theme that is going to run through here is transition, with linking this week's Torah portion to last week's, where there was like this pause button between the complaint of the people, Moses' desperation and frustration, and then when they go out and they gather too much quail, they get greedy. And while it's still between their teeth, the plague hits because they were greedy and they're buried in their greedy graves. But that pause button where the 70 elders prophesy, that's what I wanted to pull into this week's Torah portion, because I think if we know the traditional explanation of what Eldad and Medad were prophesying in the camp that so upset Yehoshua that he wanted Moses basically to make them shut up, is what he's saying in Hebrew, make them shut up. It's very strong. I think once we get that, then it decodes some passages where not only is Yeshua teaching the Torah portion, but the presence of a particular letter or account written by Luke. And he wrote two. He wrote Luke and he wrote Acts, presumably. And he wrote them to a specific person named Theophilus. And so we're going to break that down and see what most excellent Theophilus has to do with Eldad and Medad prophesying in the camp and upsetting Yehoshua terribly. So let's advance here. We went over the tzitzit last night and how the blue represents heaven, and then the white, or the natural color of the wool, represents the earth. And of course, it's after all these errors that they've made concerning going up to the land, where the spies bring back the evil report. They don't want to go up, and then they do want to go up, and then we have a Sabbath breaker. And so at this point, they're given a commandment concerning the tzitzit that's going to show them how to connect their earthly vision, which they seem to be locked in at this point, and their heavenly vision, which they have yet to acquire. And it's still a balancing act in our own lives to walk in the world that we're in, and yet not to lose our heavenly vision. Okay, and just briefly, some of the topics we'll cover. We're going to go back to Amalek, because remember, Yehoshua was instrumental in defeating Amalek in battle, but he did not defeat them in war. The war with Amalek goes on from generation to generation. We'll talk about the significance of Caleb's visit to Hebron. We'll talk about the United Kingdom and David's monarchy and how it began. We'll talk about the tree that Moses is asking about. When you go into the land, tell me if you see a tree. And it's a particular tree he's interested in. It's usually mistranslated in English as, tell me if it has trees. That's not what he says. He says, tell me if it has a tree. And then, of course, last night we dealt with the prophecy of Eldad and Medad in the camp, and why it was so upsetting to Yehoshua. And our Brit Chadashah texts I took from Luke, not just the gospel, but the first part of Acts as well, in his foreword or in his preamble, whatever you want to call it. And I showed how Luke is recording that these are eyewitness accounts, and we can set this into the setting of the 12 spies, how they were supposed to go and experience the land, and they were to bring back eyewitness accounts and essentially a recording of what their eyes saw. And as we saw in the commandment of the tzitzit, instead of bringing back a faithful and true witness of the land, the way that they packaged and placed the words, 10 of them at least, we see that they did stray after their heart and after their eyes, which were earthbound. They failed to even understand the implication of the huge grapes that they harvested. What kind of realm that they had tapped into. And so Luke begins his gospel saying that this is an eyewitness account, a recording of eyewitness accounts, people that were there from the beginning as servants of the word. And it's addressed to the most excellent Theophilus. And we linked Theophilus to Eldad and to Medad, the two who were prophesying in the camp. And when we look at the legend of Strong's definitions, usually we're looking at a Greek word and trying to figure out what the Hebrew word was. In this case, we've looked at a Hebrew word and we found a Greek word that's surprising, because we see that Eldad, one of the men, one of the prominent, excellent leaders that was prophesying in the camp, the cognate to Eldad is Theophilus. And so Theophilus is mentioned twice, once in Luke, once in Acts. And we saw that Eldad was prophesying with his pair. Remember, Yeshua sent the disciples out 2 by 2. He sent them out in pairs. And so Eldad was also prophesying as a pair, and his twin or his prophecy mate was Medad. And they share the same root word in Hebrew, Yedad, for love or beloved. So as they're prophesying, we have to understand that it's coming from a position of love. The message is from a position of love. And so our question was, what was the prophecy? Since we don't have a transcript, what exactly were they prophesying that could be such a loving prophecy and yet upset Yehoshua so much that he wanted Moses to rebuke them and make them stop saying what they were saying. And here's the second mention of Theophilus, the cognate to Eldad. And we broke that down last night as to the change or the transition, the novel, the new era that Yeshua is ushering in as he gives instructions to the disciples after his resurrection over a period of 40 days. Again, 40 days keeps popping up here. This is important because, again, it's words in the hood. If we see them in this neighborhood together, and then we also see them over in this neighborhood, usually they will help decode one another. And so they want to know, are you at this time restoring the kingdom to Israel? That was the question that Moses was asking. We are so close to the land. When he sends the spies out, they're literally going to walk through the land. Is this the time that the kingdom is going to be restored? Will we be able to ascend to the garden and resume those positions there? And remember, in the rabbinic literature, the understanding is, had they not built the golden calf and worshiped it, they would have. When they went into the land, there wouldn't have been one person that raised a weapon against them, and they would have walked right into that immortality of the garden. And of course, that didn't happen. And so is this the kingdom? He wants the spies to go in and to bring back a report, and he's going to ask them to look for something very specific while they're in the land that would be assigned to him as to whether they were about to enter that kingdom. And of course, Yeshua says, you can't know exactly the time. But in the meantime, while you're waiting, I want you to be my witnesses. I want you to be faithful with the message. I don't want you to be like the 10 spies. And we looked at parallel texts where Yeshua also sends out the 70 and emphasizes the mistakes that have just been made concerning the quail and the manna, and tells them not to be greedy and not to have a typical greeting in that Middle Eastern way and Near Eastern way, where when somebody greets you, the idea is that they flatter you, they tell you how wonderful you are, how smart you are, how great you are. They humble themselves before you. I say one of my favorites is I dance circles around you. To the American mind, it sounds crazy, but it's very Middle Eastern. And if you're ever around people who were brought up in the Middle East, it's called ta'aruf in Farsi, but it's an exaggerated courtesy. And Yeshua says, don't even pause and do that. All right, even though it's very much a part of the culture, there are certain religious figures who seek after those greetings in the marketplace. Don't greet anybody, because I don't want you absorbing that flattery and thinking, because I have given you this power of the Spirit to heal and so forth and cast out demons. I don't want you to absorb all the flattery that you're going to receive. So keep moving. Don't absorb that. Don't end up like the Israelites, being greedy for the compliments and people telling you how wonderful you are and how smart you are and, you know, what a great minister of the word you are and how anointed you are. Don't entertain that. Keep moving, lest it impair your ability by allowing pride to seep in. And he says, yes, you're worthy. When you go into a house, they should be able to feed you, lodge you, but don't ask for anything more. Just accept what's set before you. And that's very much a part of courtesy anyway. Is when you go into someone's home, you eat what is set before you. You don't get up and go into the kitchen and start rummaging through the pantry to adjust the meal to suit yourself. It's a matter of humility to sit at someone's table and perhaps eat something you don't even like. But again, Yeshua wants them to be humble so that they don't repeat the mistakes of the wilderness. Okay, and then he goes on and talks about the one who listens to you, listens to me, the one who rejects you, rejects me, and he who rejects me, rejects the one who sent me. We see Yeshua stepping back into Moshe's sandals at this point, because he has to remind Yehoshua that even Eldad and Medad are prophesying on behalf of himself, because it was some of his spirit that Adonai said he would put upon them. And we know that spirit was the spirit of the Holy One. So the Israelites should listen to their words of prophecy, just as if Moshe himself were prophesying, because these are the words that are coming from the Holy One. We also know that as Yeshua was telling his 70 disciples this information and instructing them, he also starts to speak woes to certain cities in the Galilee where he mentioned this would be one of the synagogues that he probably ministered in. But we know that the Israelites did, for the most part, reject Moshe and the 70 elders' prophecy, because it was followed by the greed of the quail, where they had to die and be buried because of their greed. And so we have to be careful when we're blessed by the king in the kingdom with this power, because we can begin to entertain the serpent, or best case, we would learn to become a servant. It would more humble us, the fact that he would give us such a power, that he would give us such a gift with the power of the Holy Spirit, instead of making us greedy for the compliments and the attaboys and the attagirls and the likes on Facebook and all the things that we run after. The effect that it should have is making us more humble, less demanding of others, and more of a servant ourselves. And he says, yes, you can tread on the serpents that would tempt you to become like that. So the question was, what was the content of the prophecy that upset Yehoshua? We can't know for sure because we don't have a transcript. We just know it was very upsetting. And it shouldn't have been upsetting that they were prophesying in the camp instead of at the tent, because if they were ritually unfit, if they were in a state of tameh for whatever reason, they couldn't approach the tent. So the sages say it must have been what they were saying, not where they were saying it. And when we look at what the sages say the content of the prophecy is, and we match it against the two mentions of Theophilus, the cognate of Eldad, then we see why Yehoshua might have been upset, because they would have been prophesying of a change, of a transition, of a novel approach to what the people had become used to. Sanhedrin 17a tells us, they said, Moshe dies and Yehoshua leads to the land. And again, it doesn't say when. It's just a prophecy that Moshe is going to die and Yehoshua is going to lead them to the land. In the same way, as Yeshua instructs the disciples over that 40 days after his resurrection, he's telling them some new ideas, things that somehow they didn't absorb in the few years that they ministered with him. He's saying there's a change that's going to take place. You've been leaning on me. You've been depending upon me. But now you're basically going to have to put your big boy pants on, and you're going to have to go out and heal people and prophesy and minister the word and do everything that I did. I'm sending you now. The difference is Moshe will die, and Yeshua was resurrected. And so now we might get an insight into why the Eldad, Medad, those two names both contain a root, a Hebrew root that means love. Because, one of our favorite verses, even though there's lots of love verses, John 3:16 is known the world over. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And so there is a prophecy within this prophecy. If this is indeed the content of the prophecy, that there will be a change, that Moshe will die, but Yehoshua will lead them into the land. Well, we know it's not just a physical land. We know that it is a representation of the realm that hovers just above it, that we would say is the third heaven or the Garden of Eden. That was their destination. And so Yehoshua is going to have to be the one to lead them into the promised land and the physical realm, in the same way that Yeshua is going to have to be the one who leads us into the garden itself. It's by his work that he is going to prepare the way. And we can see these similarities and the instructions that Yeshua gives to the disciples to prepare them for this new idea that there's going to be a transition. Now, it's not a brand new thing, just like coronavirus, COVID-19 it's not a completely new thing on the earth. It's an old thing on the earth. It's just a novel manifestation of the corona. In the same way, when Moshe is going to hand leadership over to Yehoshua, it's not a brand new leadership. Yehoshua is leading in the steps that Moshe established for him, in the same way that the disciples would follow the steps that Yeshua had established for him. He said, you're going to do what I did. In fact, you're going to do more. This is important. It's important that I go away so that you can go into the land. Except, remember, we studied way back in our Torah portions where there's the land of Israel, but then it talks about how Jacob's tent is enlarged among the nations. And so Israel at this point has been scattered among the nations. And so Yeshua needs to widen the scope. He ministered within this natural boundary of Judea and Israel. But he says, I'm sending you beyond these boundaries to preach this good news, to take this good report, not the evil report that said resurrection is impossible. That's basically what the 10 spies were saying. We can't go in there. It's impossible. Once you understand what the land is and what it represents, then you see how they have slandered pretty much the third heaven. And so Yeshua is saying it's possible. What did he say to the thief? This day you will be with me in paradise. Paradise is the third heaven, the Garden of Eden. He can help you to cross over, and he can make you stand. So here's a few points to connect these things. We know some of the Spirit upon Moses was placed upon the 70. And that's exactly what we get in the first story in Acts, which it's how Yeshua promised the disciples that power of the Holy Spirit to continue to deliver his message as his witnesses, because they had firsthand experience with the miracles, the signs and the wonders he performed. And that's mentioned also in the first Theophilus reference in Luke. And with the 70 elders, that's what we have. 70 men who have firsthand experience as eyewitnesses, and therefore they're perfect to prophesy. Then what we see is that once he gives them these instructions over this 40-day period, he disappears. In fact, they see him disappear. They see him caught up into the cloud. And this, according to tradition, is also the prophecy of Eldad and Medad, that out of love, there's going to be a transition. There's going to be a transformation and a transfer of the message from this person to this person. It doesn't undo the foundational work of Moshe. It doesn't undo the foundational work of Yeshua. Instead, it advances that work. And so it's novel, again, not in the sense that it's brand new, but a new manifestation of that foundational work. It's in Acts that we get this reference, and it's very careful to mention Yeshua's resurrection and how he appeared over 40 days between Pesach week and Shavuot, right? So we don't even have a Theophilus report if there's no resurrection. And so when we look at the prophecy of Eldad, our Hebrew Theophilus, and Medad, that's what we see in the content of their prophecy, is that, yes, you will be able to go over, even though Moshe will not lead you over. He will lay the foundation for you, but it's going to have to be Yehoshua who's actually going to affect that transformation. And once you cross into the land, it is symbolic of resurrection from the dead. It's symbolic of crossing back into the garden. So now we understand Caleb's passion for the land. And we see why his route was different than the others. His route took him to a most ancient place of faith in the resurrection called Hebron. They went to the valley. They went to the valley of Esco, which is adjacent to Hebron. And I'm going to pull up some maps that we've looked at before to help you kind of position where Hebron is in relation to the valley and so forth, and the route to Bethlehem and to Jerusalem. We know that the 12 spies started out together. But again, often the true text will be translated out because it seems not to make sense. And that's why it's so important for us to at least be able, even if we don't understand the words, to be able to read the words, because then we can go and we can look up the words. And it will help us decode when something like that is happening. But it says only he, even though they went up, v'ya'alu, you can see the Hebrew down there at the bottom on the right, v'ya'alu, that's plural. They went up, they ascended, b'negev, they went through the Negev desert, v'yavo, v'yavo is singular. He came ad Hebron. He came to Hebron. And then later we get who it is. We understand that it was Caleb that went to Hebron because it describes the things that he did there, and we understand that that was given to him as a possession, as an inheritance by Yehoshua. And so we even get a little parenthetical expression that, again, it gives us the number 7 to think about. It says, when they had gone up into the Negev, he came to Hebron, where Achiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were. Anak was a giant. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before Tzoan in Egypt. So it's telling you it's an ancient city. It's not a new thing. It has a very old and a very mystical connotation. But 7 years before Tzoan in Egypt. And it's not the only time that Hebron will be mentioned in the context of 7 years. And there's a picture of the monument that King Herod built over the top of the cave of Machpelah. It had smaller buildings over it before that, but King Herod is responsible for much of that stonework that you see. And it's worth going. If you've never been to Hebron, strange things happen there. And it was a strange neighborhood back in Abraham's time, giants and all sorts of odd people. But it's worth going there. It's mentioned more often in the Torah than Jerusalem, which is not really mentioned by name in the Torah. It's hinted at, and we know where it is when we see Hamakom. But Hebron is very explicit. Now, later in Deuteronomy, Devarim, Moshe describes the spies with a particular term. In the Torah portion, they've been referred to as, what they're doing is tour. They're like tourists, the modern day word for tourist. They're basically strolling around looking at things. And so as Moshe is reminding the people, the Israelites, of this event, in Deuteronomy 1:23, he says, the thing pleased me, and I took 12 of your men, 1 man for each tribe. They turned and went up into the hill country and came to the valley of Eshcol and spied it out. So their spies is a little bit different from tourists. Vayeraglu, right? Vayeraglu. If you go back to the encounter between Joseph and his brothers, when they come up and they do not know that he is second to Pharaoh, they don't recognize him, he continually accuses them of being spies using this particular root, regel, which means foot. What does a spy do? They go around on foot spying on things. They're observers. And they're looking for weaknesses typically, which is what makes them spies. And so these 12 spies would have been going into the land looking for weaknesses that they could exploit in order to take the land. And so we see that all the spies apparently went to the valley. But it doesn't say that they went to Hebron. It says they went to the valley of Eshcol, which is adjacent to Hebron. But at Hebron is the location of the tombs of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And remember the story of Sarah, why she went to Hebron, why she went to Kiryat Arba. Because once she realized that Abraham did intend to kill Isaac, she goes there and she literally prays herself to death, because she thinks Abraham has misunderstood the instruction, that he's interpreting Olah offering as literally killing his son and offering him up, whereas she's understanding Olah as lift him up as a consecrated sacrifice and then you bring him back down, kind of similar to what Moshe did with the Levites. It's an agreement to consecrate the son's life. And so thinking, oh my goodness, Adonai would never require human sacrifice, she goes and she intercedes at Hebron, at the cave of Machpelah, which is why when Abraham goes to bury her, he doesn't go to Beersheba, where they're living. Instead, he has to go to Hebron and purchase the field in the cave of Machpelah. Why did they need that particular cave or field? Why would Sarah go to that particular location? The tradition is that's where Adam and Eve were buried. And they're buried there because that's thought to be an entrance or a portal back to the Garden of Eden. And so to be buried there is a statement that you make that says, I believe in the resurrection. I believe that. So I want to be buried here, as close as I can get to this entryway back into the garden. And so Sarah goes there to pray, praying for a resurrection. And we know that Isaac is that picture of resurrection. So the fact that they would go to the valley of Eshcol, but not go to this most significant place where their fathers and their mothers are buried, establishing this Israelite belief in the resurrection of the dead and the ability to cross back into the garden. But it's Caleb who is going to make this particular journey to this particular place, which we're told is still a stronghold of the giants, or the descendants of the giants. Now we know that Joseph had accused his 10 brothers of being spies. Now we've got 10 brothers from 10 of the tribes functioning as spies, meraglim, just like Joseph had accused them. And we know that Caleb is from the tribe of Judah, and Yehoshua is from Ephraim. And so, again, you see that connection there at the end of the story of Joseph, where Judah draws near to Joseph, where they have a connection at that point of servanthood. And so we've got 10 out who aren't as committed to this idea of servanthood and sacrifice. But that was really the thing that set this whole thing off. Had Joseph not been telling stories to his father about his brothers, they probably would not have kidnapped him, sold him into slavery because of his little spy stories. Then they wouldn't have fallen into slavery because of the spy stories. And possibly we wouldn't have had 10 spies giving an evil report, which the evil report is the dibat ha'aretz. Diba is the report. Dibat ha'aretz ra'ah, evil, an evil report. But those who believed the 10 spies, the spy stories, fell in the wilderness. And they fell separated from the land in the physical sense. Where they appear at the resurrection is probably not our business. But we know that the feet, the meraglim, remember the spy is connected with where your feet go and the message your feet carry. Now, we know that we have other passages that tell us how lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news. But how unlovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings spy stories, who are telling a dibat ra'ah, an evil report. We can either bring a spy story that's evil, or we can bring the word, bad news or good news. So Numbers 13:17. It says, when Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, he said to them, go up there into the Negev, then go up into the hill country, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. How is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps or with fortifications? How is the land? Is it fat or is it lean? Are there trees in it or not? That's an incorrect translation. It's singular. Make an effort then to get some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. That's important to know. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Tzin as far as Rehov at Lebo Hamat. When they had gone up into the Negev, They came to Hebron. Okay, remember? He came to Hebron, not they. This is the problem with translations. We miss the little details that they try to fix for us. I don't think they do it with evil intent. They're just trying to make the text work grammatically, but they're losing the prophetic value of it. So he came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before Tzoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol. They came to the valley of Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. And they carried it on a pole between 2 men, with some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the valley of Eshcol, because the cluster which the sons of Israel cut down from there. When they returned from spying out the land at the end of 40 days. Okay, there's our 40 days again. They proceeded to come to Moshe and Aharon and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. And they brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. So they picked grapes particularly. Here's the wilderness of Tzin. This would have been along their path. Now, this I found, and we're not going to take this as Bible scripture, but I think it's an important historical reference, and I'll have the reference on the next slide. But I wanted to bring out where it says it was the time of the first ripe grapes. And we tend to associate that with Sukkot, and we should, because it says from your wine vat and from your threshing floor, you'll bring the first fruit in at Sukkot. However, by Sukkot, you've had more than first fruits by that point. You have different varieties of grapes that are going to ripen at different times, and depending on the geography, whether it's high up in the Golan, whether it's down in the valleys and so forth, the type of grape and the microclimate is going to make a difference. But apparently, during some period of their history, they actually observed something called the Feast of the First Fruits of the Wine. And here's what I found out about it. It says it's a holiday celebrated by the ancient Israelites as purported in the Temple Scroll of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The holiday, which is observed on the 3rd day of the 5th month, the month of Av, is not mentioned in the Bible. The date is significant because it is exactly 50 days after the 15th of Sivan, the Festival of Weeks. So 50 days, it's like a little jubilee after the little jubilee. On this holiday, the Israelites were commanded to bring their first fruits of the grapes to the temple as an offering. After this holiday, and it sounds much like the first fruits of the barley, the Israelites were permitted to eat from their vines, whether the grapes were ripe or still unripe, because after the observances of this holiday, they had made a full atonement for the wine. This day coincides with the 9 days when mourning practices take place and when wine and meat are prohibited. This holiday is not observed today. Apparently it was only for a little burst of history that it was observed. But I did want to give you context for the time of the first ripe grapes. When would that have been? Approximately or exactly 50 days after Shavuot. And we would have entered into the month of Av, which is a dark month in Jewish history. And because we've been looking at Zechariah's fast prophecies based on the 10th of Tevet this year, I think we have to maybe investigate going forward, investigate a little more into those fasts, especially of the 5th month. Okay, these dogs are about to go crazy barking probably. If he rings this doorbell, hopefully he'll just drop the package and go. And there we go. So, easy. Shine. I know you like the brown man, but come back here. Shine. UPS. What can brown do for you? They can bring you popsicle molds. Okay, we've got this beautiful watermelon, and it's just time to make popsicles. That's what that's about. And I'm as excited as she is. It's just not showing on my face. At any rate, back to these dark days of Av and the 9 days, I think we have to pay attention to that and educate ourselves on that this year if we never have before. Because again, if the 10th of Tevet started this 18-month cycle of the siege of Jerusalem, then in 2021, those particular fast days could hold even more significance. So that's kind of on my to-do list with this class, is to do a lot more investigation with these fasts that Zechariah lists. And not only did I uncover this yesterday, somebody sent me an email that was pointed out some things in the Talmud that have kind of been scrubbed a little so that they're not plainly referencing Yeshua. So I want to go back and I want to look at that. At any rate, here's your GPS for the first fruits of the grapes, or the time of the first, right, grapes. And again, here's the reference. I just took a screenshot. So if you wanted to go back and read the references, this is one of the books where you could find more information about the first fruits of the wine. And then here on the left, I gave you some other references where you might be able, if you've got access to an academic site, you could go in and read the articles. I didn't want to just throw that without any context in there, since it's not literally in the scripture. But if we think of Yeshua, you know, he's speaking to his disciples over a 40-day period prior to Shavuot. It tells us, if this is a GPS, then those 40 days after Shavuot would have also been very significant in terms of leading them up to a time where we have to be very cautious and very mindful and very prayerful, which would be the 9 days in the month of Av, when typically bad things have happened. But in this case, because of what Yeshua said, there might have been a turnaround with the disciples, where these dark days could have been seen in a much better light in terms of the resurrection. So we've got the 9 days of Av. Just for you who are not familiar with it, I went ahead and just did a little concise summary. The 9 days of Av are the first 9 days, and it says of the Jewish month. Typically, you're not going to find it on a Gregorian calendar. But it says the Jewish month of Av, which corresponds to our July and August. The 9 days begin on Rosh Chodesh Av, or the first of Av, and they conclude on the fast of Tisha B'Av, which is the 9th of Av. And so we can see that the first fruits of the wine, if we look at the date of it, it would have fallen in this period of the 9 days. Now, in certain times in history, it wouldn't have had as dark and gloomy a history as it does today after 2 temples have been destroyed. But kind of think back what it would have been like before the first temple was destroyed, and you would still have the baggage of the 10 spies, but you wouldn't have the baggage of the destruction of 2 temples to pile on top of that. So it says the 9 days are part of the 3 weeks, which begin with a fast on the 17th of Tammuz, which we've discussed some of these dates starting with the 10th of Tevet, but it's remembered as the date when King Nebuchadnezzar breached the walls of Jerusalem. And so the 3 weeks with the fast of Tisha B'Av, when the Babylonians destroyed the first temple, and then you've got the repetition when the second temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. So we've got, in this period of the 9 days, which is part of the 3 weeks, and then I have this reference that somebody sent me yesterday on the week of Messiah, which is a week of tribulation. But it's consistent, I think we can see, with the time that the evil report is brought by the 10 spies on the 9th of Av, which would be a week later, less a Shabbat, because it tells us it was the time of the first ripening grapes. So that gives us a really good verification of date here. And when we do commemorate the 9th of Av, there's some historical evidence that this is the time that the spies brought the evil report. And like I said, we want to pay special attention to those fast dates in 2021, especially since Zechariah prophesied that they will one day be turned to joy. And the symbol of joy in Judaism and in Scripture is wine. So here's what Moshe said in Numbers 13:20. How is the land, fat or lean? Are there trees in it or not? I put the Hebrew text on there so that you could say he did not ask them about trees. He says, is there in her a tree? A tree, singular. Just tree. It's not the tree, it's just a tree. And the understanding is the tree that he is inquiring about is the tree of life. Remember, the land represents resurrection to the garden. And so Moshe wants to know, tell me if you see the tree of life. That's the only tree that he's interested in. They're going to see lots of trees. But I want to know if this tree is there. Now, there's many traditions about what the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was. Was it a fig tree? Was it wheat? And that would be a long rabbit trail on what constitutes a tree in Scripture. But a lot of traditions tell us that it was a grapevine, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so Moshe wants the spies to see if there is a tree in the land, the tree of life. And instead, what the spies see are grapes. They still see the mixture. Remember the 2 colors of the tzitzit. The natural color of the wool, which is kind of an off-white color, and there's the blue of heaven. Now, there's 2 valleys mentioned specifically in the Torah, other than the Yarden. And the first 2 valleys are identified with a temporary dwelling. We have the Esco Valley, and that's going to be going back to the time of Abraham. But it's the place where the 10 spies became discouraged and formulated an evil report. That's where they saw the grapes. It was the sight of the grapes that apparently got them, and the size of the giants in that area, which the giants didn't bother Abraham at all. They didn't bother Isaac at all. They didn't bother Jacob at all. So why are they bothering these 10 spies? And then the other valley, of course, is going to be the Arnon in Moab, where the battle for the land begins. And it's the place where they sing the song of the well, where it like spring up a well. But these 2 valleys are mentioned, but the Eshcol specifically, and it's identified with Abraham's friends. And it's specifically a brother of Mamre. And I have here the Bible Atlas entry so that you can see the context of Mamre, one of Abraham's allies. and he's an Amorite. Remember, those are strange people. And he has a brother named Eshcol and a brother, Aner. And again, we know that some of these are descendants of giants. And there's also a grove of trees in Mamre, the oaks or the terebinths of Mamre. But they're in the area of Hebron and Machpelah. It's all in the same area around Hebron. And so the spies want to go to the valley of Eshcol, but it's going to be Caleb who goes to Hebron. The field that was purchased as a burial tomb. And see how these two portions adjacent to one another? We have this stark contrast with the burial places of the greedy people who would rather have physical, natural food than heavenly food, manna. And now it's pushed right up against the story of Caleb, who wants to go to the burial place of the patriarchs and the matriarchs who were buried in Machpelah as a sign that they believed in the resurrection. And so it tells us in Genesis 23:17 about this field. It says Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, based Mamre, the field and the cave which was in it, and all the trees which were in the field that were within all the confines of its border were deeded over to Abraham for a possession in the presence of the sons of Chet, before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field at Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that is in it were deeded over to Abraham for a burial site by the sons of Chet. So again, it's giving us placement. Here's a map. You'll remember this map. So you can see it's not far from Hebron to Mamre. And you can see a little bit of the topographical formation there, that it is in a valley. Okay, here's from Google Maps, I think, or MapQuest, one of the two, probably Google Maps. But you can see this ancient road that goes down through the valley from Hebron. This is the route that Jacob would have sent Joseph to go find the brothers in the north part, going to Shechem. But you can see going through that valley, there's an ancient road, and it goes from Hebron. It goes to Ephrat, which is basically the Jewish hill adjacent to Bethlehem, where you have a lot of Christian Arabs. And then the road continues on to Jerusalem. It goes through or passes by Rachel's tomb, and then it goes on into Jerusalem. That's an ancient route called the Path of the Patriarchs. And that's what we know about the Valley of Eshcol. It connects Jerusalem to Hebron. And that road runs along the ridge. And so if this is this entrance back to the Garden of Eden, then it faces Jerusalem and Bethlehem through the Valley of Eshcol. And it's here that the Israelites would have seen the giants, because that's where they lived. Now there's going to be others up on the other side of the Yarden, other giants, but they're still descendants of the giants living in this valley. And this is what they report. They report the giants and those enormous grapes. It says they came to the valley of Eshcol and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. And they carried it on a pole between two men with some of the pomegranates and the figs. So the selection of two types of fruit to go with the grapes, right? And look at the contrast. It says they carried it between two men. Remember, a balance, blue and white, or blue and natural. I don't want to call it white because it's not exactly white. It's a natural color. But the grapes traditionally represent the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because wine, it has a good as the joyful aspect, and then it also has the intoxication aspect, which is not good, that causes you to lose your boundaries. Pomegranates symbolize the 613 commandments. They have, now they don't have exactly 613 in every pomegranate, but that number of pips in the pomegranates represents the 613. On the other hand, the fig tree, what did they use to try to cover up their sin in the garden? Fig leaves, which was an insufficient atonement for the grape, if it was a grape. And so we can see even here, there's two men, we've got our pair here, and then we've got just the commandments here, and then yes, the fig tree over here, which represents our shame and humiliation and sin. And so they still have mixed feelings, apparently, about what they're seeing and about moving into the garden. Is it because of what Eldad and Medad prophesied, that Moshe would have to die before they could go into the land, and they don't want Moshe to go away? Did they conspire to give the evil report so they could just hang out with Moses in the wilderness? We don't know. We can't know, but it sure does make you think. And so we know that Caleb conquers Hebron, and he retakes it from the giants when they return after the wilderness journey. He opens up the pathway in the valley of Eshcol to Jerusalem. So symbolically, you can see how that would follow their expectation that there is an entrance at Hebron into the garden. And what does Caleb do? In the natural realm, at least, he opens up that entrance of that valley from Hebron, from the cave, the valley of Eshcol, and then the road into Jerusalem. And they did that after they defeated these other enemies in the valley of Arnon, which is the other valley that's mentioned in the Torah. And so what does it do? It allows them to achieve a sense of permanence and the ability to expand in their inheritance in the land because of what Caleb did, conquering the giants and retaking that valley to Jerusalem. And later, his daughter, he bequeaths this property to his daughter. In Judges 1:11, it says, then from there he went against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir formerly was Kiryat Sefer, the city of the book. And Caleb said, the one who attacks Kiryat Sefer and captures it, I will even give him my daughter Achsah for a wife. Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it. So he gave him his daughter Achsah for a wife. Then it came about when she came to him that she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. Remember, it describes the field when Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah. Then she alighted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? And she said, give me a blessing. Since you have given me the land of the Negev, remember that was their route in, and then he went to Hebron. She says, you've given me the land of the Negev. You've given me the pathway in. She says, give me also springs of water. So Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. And Hebron still has these springs, by the way. Now, it doesn't tell you in the text where those springs are located, but we do know that they're there. And in fact, at least in the Second Temple era, we're not sure about the first, but at least in the Second Temple, one of those springs supplied water. It went from Hebron to Bethlehem to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. It was the source of the mikveh water for the high priest on Yom Kippur. And so Caleb says, we've conquered this area. Now we need the city of the book. I want to connect the city of the book to Jerusalem. And achsa, his daughter, it means an ankle ornament. It draws attention to the foot itself. Remember, it was the feet that got the Israelites in trouble to begin with. Now Caleb is back, and he's trying to fix this so that they quit being the wrong kind of spies. So that ancient path from Hebron is going to take them through this entrance to the garden, a place of faith in the resurrection. The spring goes then to Bethlehem, the birthplace of the king, and then it goes to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And it opens up the path for the foot festivals. Remember, there's 3 festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, that are called foot festivals. And at least for those coming from the territories of Judah and adjacent tribes, they would have taken that path of the patriarchs along the valley of Esco. Let's see, I'm going to skip over that. Here's the map again, so you can get a better idea of where they would have turned up. From the Negev, Beersheba is in the Negev. Then you can see Hebron just above, and then you can see the pathway up to Jerusalem. And you can also see the path that Yosef would have gone up into Shechem looking for his brothers. And that's an ancient marker along that path of the patriarchs. Okay, so even though Yehoshua had defeated Amalek in battle before, apparently the 10 spies don't believe that they can win the war with Amalek. So Numbers 13:27, it says, "Thus they told him and said, we went into the land where you sent us, and it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." Now, just as a reminder, there's 4 rivers in Eden. According to the tradition and the Song of Songs, which is where the tradition comes from, 2 of those rivers do flow with milk and honey. And then the other is, I believe, wine and balsam. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there, the giants. Amalek is living in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites are living in the hill country, and the Canaanites are living by the sea and by the side of the Jordan. And so they point out Amalek is still there. They've just had a really bad experience with Amalek. And it took Moshe, having his hands propped up in order for Yehoshua to prevail over Amalek. And at first, Yehoshua is silent when they give this report. At first, only Caleb is going to speak up. And maybe being fresh from the battle, he's thinking about that. When somebody attacks you suddenly, and it's not an easy defeat on your part, it makes you think twice about wanting to tangle with those people. Or maybe he just he wanted to give Moshe the opportunity to speak first. We don't know why he didn't speak up with Caleb when Caleb very passionately speaks against this report. So let's go back to Amalek, Exodus 17:8, to try to get the context, where Amalek comes and fights against Israel at Rephidim. It says, Yehoshua did as Moshe told him and fought against Amalek. And Moshe, Aharon, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So it came about when Moshe held his hand up that Israel prevailed. And when he let his hand down, Amalek prevailed. But Moshe's hands were heavy. Then they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aharon and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other. There's another pair. Thus his hands were steady until the sun set. So Yehoshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Then the Lord said to Moshe, write this in a book as a memorial and recite it to Yehoshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. And so apparently, and then he goes on and says, the Lord will have war against Amalek from generation to generation, because it's a spiritual thing that infects people, not so much a people group. Because these Amalekites are everywhere. All right, he says right now they're down there in the Negev, but they're going to be over in Babylon too later. They can crop up anywhere. But Yehoshua at first is silent. And again, if what Eldad and Medad prophesied was that Moshe would die and Yehoshua would have to lead them in, Yehoshua knows he's going to have to conquer Amalek. It was written down in a book and given to him. And in his mind, is he turning this over and thinking, oh no, if Moshe dies, who will hold up his hands? How will I defeat Amalek? But it was written in a book to encourage him to go on. And maybe that's the hesitation. We're not really told why he hesitates and doesn't speak up until later. But remember the three things that Amalek does. He cools off your spiritual growth. He has no reverence of Adonai, which means he thinks things just happen in the world and mankind therefore can control the world, that there's no divine intervention. And we know that Amalek's character is revealed by the keli, which is the nocturnal emission. In other words, it's an unfruitful, self-serving attitude. It just does not bear fruit. And that's why I say Amalek can pop up anywhere and does frequently. And what comes next in the story is going to be the Sabbath breaker. It's toward the end, right before we get the commandment for tzitzit, or tzitziot is plural, on the four corners of their garment. Now, it's a new commandment. It is novel, but it reminds them of this ancient problem. How am I going to manage this dual nature, the spiritual and the natural, so that I can enter the kingdom of the garden? How do I defeat Amalek? Well, see, if I weight my life more toward heavenly things, then I'm going to completely lose my earthly grip. If I am so completely immersed in the natural world, the logical world, the world of science and so forth, again, I'm subject to Amalek, who says it's all natural. It can all be explained scientifically. It's only what men do that matters. There is no heaven. And so we have all sorts of temptations if we neglect either the blue or the natural, the white. And that's why we have to be careful. And possibly the 10 spies are trying to buy time. They might think they need to learn more Torah from Moses before he dies. Like Yehoshua being silent at first. Oh my goodness, how am I going to battle these Amalekites again without Moshe? Maybe the spies are saying, how can we possibly walk into the kingdom without learning more from Moshe there to support us? But what was different about Caleb and Yehoshua, who does speak up, is they didn't just learn from Moshe. They got what Yeshua was saying to his disciples. If they believe you, they'll believe me. If they believe me, they believe the Father. Caleb and Yehoshua believed Moshe because they believed the one who sent Moshe. And even if Moshe died, the one who sent him could also empower them to go into the land. And it's from these two, Caleb and Yehoshua, that the Jewish sages derived two types of Messiah, or Mashiach. Caleb and Yehoshua. We know Yehoshua was an Ephraimite, a descendant of Yosef. But Caleb is a descendant of Yehuda, a Jew. And they say that Mashiach ben Yosef, that aspect of Mashiach, he will focus on the physical deliverance of the nation of Israel, just like Yosef provided for his brothers outside the land. And we can definitely see Yeshua being concerned with that, even though when he ministered on earth, they kept wanting him to deliver them physically from the Romans. He said, no, I've got other sheep out here I've got to deal with. This is going to take a lot longer than you folks think. But Mashiach ben David will be, it says, from the line of Yehuda, like Caleb. And he's going to link the nation to this Davidic dynasty of kings. And they derive a deep significance to Caleb's mission of taking Hebron and Yehoshua awarding that territory to Caleb. Here's 2 Samuel 2:1. It says, then it came about afterwards that David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to one of the cities of Yehuda? And the Lord said to him, go up. So David said, where shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. So Shaul is dead, King Saul is dead, and David doesn't ascend the throne of Israel immediately. First, he ascends the throne of Judah, and he rules from Hebron. But then when we drop down to verse 10, it says, Ishbosheth, Shaul's son, was 40 years old. There's our 40, number 40 again, which transition. When we see 40, we know there's going to be a transition. When he became king over Israel, and he was king for 2 years. The house of Yehuda, however, followed David. The time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Yehuda was 7 years and 6 months. And so the sages point out that first David rules from Hebron for this 7 years before he's able to unite the kingdom under one monarchy. And they say that it's important for him to attach himself to the patriarchs and the matriarchs who are buried at Hebron before he can rule all Israel, not just Judah. Because remember, that spring there at Hebron, it goes to Bethlehem, the birthplace of the king, and then it's going to go to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which does serve all Israel. The patriarchs and the matriarchs were prophets. The king is born in Bethlehem. The priests immersed in Yom Kippur in the water from Hebron. So they're immersing in the springs of the prophets and the kings. See, those three voices we say are in the Torah, the priest, the prophet, the king. So once he's connected himself solidly to the kingdom above, remember the message of Hebron is always resurrection. Now King David knows how to join this blue of heaven with the white of the natural land of Israel, because 7 is a number of perfection. It's the number of the 7 spirits of Adonai, which are actually one, Holy Spirit. So he learns these lessons at Hebron. And in fact, his son, King Shlomo, took 7 years to build the temple. There's a foundation that is built in 7 years. And once you have that foundation of 7 years, then you are more equipped to be able to unify all kinds of different things. In the case of David, different tribes, each having its own little subculture. So in John 4:34, Yeshua said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Think of Moshe trying to talk to the Israelites about the manna. My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift your eyes and look on the fields, that they are white for harvest. Already he who reaps is receiving wages, and is gathering fruit for life eternal, so that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. And so we have to put ourselves in the sandals of the 10 spies. Caleb and Yehoshua, they already have it. It's the other 10 who are a little confused, imbalanced, understanding that this is a supernatural place. This is a special place here in the valley of Esco. Here are the grapes, but also here are the pomegranates and the figs. We're confused. Is it the Torah or is it sin? Is it joy or is it blurring the lines of sin? And Yeshua says, if you will lift up your eyes, then you will know how to see that these natural fields are white for harvest. And then you can start reaping in that natural field, also helping those whom you harvest to lift up their eyes to heaven, so that Amalek can no longer affect them and deceive them into thinking only what matters is what you do. There is no divine intervention in this world. There is no divine accounting when your life is up. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. If you will lift up your eyes, you will realize that that's a deception of the serpent. And it's not the attitude of a servant. And he says, you need to go and get involved in this harvest and start preaching life eternal. Start telling people they can cross into the garden. Yeshua is able to make us stand, even though we might think we need to study one more Torah portion. When it's time, it's time. And so Hebron, just like the tzitzit, it's going to connect us to the foundations of our faith and resurrection, to the patriarchs and the matriarchs who said there will be a resurrection. Just like Abraham, he believed even if he killed Isaac, he could be resurrected. It helps us to destroy Amalek out of our lives, who's always lying to us and telling us that things have to be natural, they have to be logical. And it's going to arouse that desire to harvest fruit from the seeds of faith that they sowed ahead of us. It's going to make sure that we don't cool off in our passion, that we're like Caleb, we're willing to just speak up against an entire congregation and say, you're wrong. You're looking at this all wrong. Because Caleb saw, look, the roots of the patriarchs and the matriarchs, yes, they're deep in the natural land, but they are just as deep above in the heavenlies. And we can bear this kind of fruit. These grapes, we can bear this kind of fruit if we will just walk in that faithfulness. So here's our tzitzit. It shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, so as to do them and not follow after your own heart and your own eyes, after which you played the harlot, so that you may remember to do all my commandments and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. And so that's with this 40-day disciple tour. Yeshua empowered those disciples to proclaim the kingdom with the Holy Spirit. And in fact, remember a pair of men in white. As the disciples are watching Yeshua, he's taken into the cloud. It says a pair of men in white were standing there. It says men. It doesn't say angels. It says men. Men in white. And they're looking up into the blue of heaven. And they're like, hey, look, guys, snap out of it. What are you looking up there for? The fields are white. Quit gazing into heaven, but take the message of heaven and start harvesting the nations on earth. Now, likewise, Yeshua said, don't be earthbound. Don't think only about food, money, and extra shoes. But you have to focus Israel's eyes on the kingdom of heaven. And you say, well, which is it? Is it blue or is it white? Well, that's the message of the tzitzit. They're all knotted and wrapped together. And it reminds us, just like the tefillin last week, when we looked at the 3 and the 4 that make 7, the letter and the spirit of the Torah, it's the same thing with the tzitzit. It's wrapping the realm of heaven around our natural world to remind us that we have the power of the Holy Spirit. Yeshua said, it's better that I go, just like Moshe needed to go so that Yehoshua could lead them in. And so Yeshua says, I have to go, but the Ruach is going to come and help you until I return to lead you in. And so we can stop all this false nostalgia for Egypt and the things to which we have been imprisoned, to where we see the world only in natural colors. And the tzitzit remind us to just keep lifting our eyes. And so those disciples, they set out for the 70 nations, children of the patriarchs and matriarchs who also believe in a resurrection, and preaching that message that there is a way, that Caleb did open a way as a proto-prophecy of Yeshua, opening the way through the valley of Eshkol to a land flowing with milk and honey, 2 of the rivers of Eden. And we can take hold of the tzitzit. We can learn to live in 2 realms, one seen and one unseen. Live with 1 foot on this earth and 1 in the garden. And if we can do that, we'll remain faithful witnesses, and we will believe it is possible to discover and to dwell in what we lost.